What's up, YouTube? It's James Q Quick from Learn, Build, Teach, and I'm super excited today to do part one of a new series that I've got called Code Reviews, where I'm going to take code from new beginning developers and give a review so that they can hopefully improve their skills and I can learn a little bit along the way and we can all kind of grow together. So that's what we're going to do in this video. It's code review number 1. All right, everybody. So I am actually really excited for this code review. Obviously, it's the first one, so I'm excited about the series, but also particularly excited about the developer that I'm going to be doing the review on. His name is JC Smiley. He is actually one of the teacher's assistants for the boot camp that I'm teaching at Launch Code here in Memphis. And he's completely self-taught. He's really avid. He's a really avid learner, loves being a part of the community, has really driven a lot of the community engagement that we have in Memphis. And I'm just an absolute fan of his attitude, his mentality, and his desire to learn. So I would recommend if you guys are looking for people that are kind of relatively new to programming and people that are kind of learning maybe alongside you, I would follow him on Twitter at JCSmiley4, and you guys can kind of get a feel for the things that he does. He posts a lot about the 100 Days of Code, things that you can probably learn from. And what we're actually going to look at today is his dice game that he sent me. And I'm going to pull this up here so we can see it. And actually, before we do that, let me just start with, he shared his GitHub profile. So that's a plus right there. So if you're a new developer and you're looking for a job, or you're working for a job, or you're just trying to kind of prove that you can write code, you definitely want to have GitHub, right? You want to have your projects on GitHub so that people can go and see them and see your code and kind of hopefully judge in a good way the things that you can do. So a little bit of feedback right here on his GitHub repository for Dice, which we'll get to in a second. Obviously on repos, public repositories, you want to have a Readme. Now this is something that I don't necessarily do on all of mine. So obviously it's kind of do as I say, not as I do personally. But you definitely want to have some documentation on here, maybe a picture or a quick video just to kind of show what the app does. And outside of that, he's got in his Dice folder, he's got a basic Create React app, so it's still got the basic README here. Obviously, that's something that he could update with some documentation as well. But what I did is I took that and I used something called Gitpod, which is actually pretty cool. So if you have any public GitHub URL, you can go to gitpod.io and then hashtag, and it will actually create an environment for you with that code and get you up and running with their code so that you can test it out. So I'm going to cancel that one and just show you this is the one that I've got open. So I'm going to walk through this code. We're going to just kind of comment on some things that I think he could do better. Also try to appreciate some things that he does, which is good also. Right before we do that, I do want to show the application. So it is, let me refresh just to kind of show it here. It's a dice game. If you're not familiar with just kind of playing dice or doing craps at a casino, basically what happens is you get your first roll, and this is going to roll. And if you, I forget the exact numbers, if you get a 2 or 11 or something, you lose automatically. I forget exactly. If you get a 7, you win automatically on the first one. Other than that, a different number will basically set the current number that you're trying to target. So in this case, the current number is 9. So then I roll again, and I'm either trying to get a 9 as a winner and not a 7 as a loser. So we'll roll again, and I'll get 4. So it's not a 9, but it's not a 7. So I just keep rolling. And 7, you lose, and he's got a cool animation there to kind of show what's going on. So one quick piece of feedback here. I think you could make this screen a little bit wider on big screens. You could, maybe there's a max width on the container that you could make a little bigger. Also, add some padding up here to the Let's Play Dice. Let your application have a little bit of room to breathe. But other than that, I think it works. It does what it's supposed to do, and it looks super cool. So that's all for just kind of the visual part. Now let's actually dive into the code. So I'm pulling up the app CSS file, and there's a couple of different things. Let's see. Let me start at the beginning. One, I like that you've got comments. You've got some comments in here that says this is like the global stuff. That's good to let people know. You've got an app background, a couple things in here. One thing I wanted to mention is you're using a class called Blue Color. And I think this is something that could be a little bit more generic. You could call this like main color or primary color, something that if you wanted to change this thing to a different color in the future, that name, whatever name I'm talking about, would still make sense, even if it's not blue, if that makes sense. I got my dog scratching in the background. All right, so another thing I see is font size is using viewport height units. This will kind of scale your font size up and down as the viewport height changes. But I think a better way to do that would be to use something called Rem, and I won't actually change this here. Just something you can look into. Rem units will basically allow you to set a standard or base height or font size for your entire application. And then by using Rem units, you can kind of say, I want things to be relative to that. And then on smaller screens, you could just change that base font size to be smaller or bigger so that everything scales up or down, which I think would give you a little bit more flexibility in the future. Another thing here, right align data. This is a little confusing because it's text align center, and you already have a text dot center class here. So I would say just use that one and maybe get rid of or update this right align. You got the text align, got a couple of media queries, which is good. You're thinking about your scaling to different screen sizes. It is a little confusing for this to be called right align data and then text align be left. That's a little bit confusing. So maybe try to rethink how you do that stuff there. I see some animations here. Just a note, you could do animation definitions in one line. If you prefer to have them split out the different properties on different lines, obviously that's perfectly fine. But you could put all those on one line and just call it animation. And then I think it's name, duration, iteration count. You have to look up the order. But it would be something like, let's see, and what's the other one? And 1 for the count. So you have to look up the order to see exactly what that looks like, but you could put all those things on one line. All right. Just going through here. I love the fact that you did animations. I think that's super cool. Another thing that's a little confusing is left dice having text align right. There may not be a way around that, but just left and right, anytime you see them in the same definition for a property is a little confusing. Got more definition or more animations, which is super cool. Again, really good job on that. I like that you documented the end of one component, the start of another for your CSS. You could look into splitting those out into different CSS files. When you start to scale up and you've got like a ton of CSS, you'll probably need to start splitting that up using SAS or something like that. In this case, you don't have a ton, so I think it makes sense just to have one file here, and then you're annotating your code, which is good. So you get what you need to out of it. All right, so I'm just going to go through. Let's start with the dice here. I'm going to go through these components and just kind of talk through what I see. One of the things that I do see is I didn't know this existed, but there's a React Bootstrap package which allows you to use Bootstrap as React components. That makes a lot of sense. That's actually super cool. I've never done that. I just used regular Bootstrap and then used the classes. But in this case, you're importing these components from React Bootstrap and then using them appropriately, which is super cool. So one thing that jumps out on this part is this looks really repetitive, right? So the difference is you're checking a property called dice, and if it equals 6, do this. If it equals 5, do that. 4, do that. 3, do that. 2, do that. 1, do that. And these things are not that different. If you look at this line of code versus this line of code, the only thing that changes, make sure I'm getting this right, is this piece of text here. So you could actually make that dynamic. And so let's do, I'm going to actually hope this works out here. Oops, sorry about that. Nope, I don't want to. I don't want a recording Siri. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to not check the value of dice and just return this column. And I think the only thing in here that's dependent upon that input is that. I think all those look the same. So what you could do is you could say number to text map. And this is maps are key value pairs or objects in JavaScript. And you could just say for the key of 1, it could be the string 1. 2 could be 2. This will take a second, but after we have this thing, then the only thing we need to change is to make this string dice6 dynamic. So what we can do is change this to be a template string with the \6. This is the ES6 function. And instead of using the hard-coded 6, what we'll do is we'll call inside of here, we'll call number to text map, and we'll call it with props.dice. And then is that thing closed out? So I think this will still give you the same impact. The only thing that you have to add is this map so that you have some way of converting the input, the dice property, to a string. And I won't run this just in case I have a typo, but you should look at trying to minimize the amount of code that you write to handle those different scenarios, because if we go back to the beginning, way back, let me go all the way back, you've got lots of lines of code in here, and the only thing that changes between them is this part right here. All right, so I think that would actually improve that a lot. So let's go down to the display. Don't know if I had any thoughts on here. You're using a bunch of different column structures for your display here. I think you could mention this before. You could update that blue color class to be something more generic. You could also, since you're using React Bootstrap, you could also use Bootstrap colors. And I think primary color is blue. You could use the danger color as red, things like that. So that might make it a little less specific to the things that you're doing. Let's go on to the display button. This is very similar. Display and display button are very similar. So maybe there's some ways that you could minimize that and make them kind of a generic component. I'm not really sure, but something you could look into. Button text color here, again, you could use, if you're using just a Bootstrap button, it should have things that you can set with its class names as well. So primary button, secondary button, error warning, and danger button, things like that. They've got classes to take care of colors on a button for you. So you should be able to use those instead of having to do your own, unless you really need to. Get into the $sign. One thing that I found is $sign and lose money are actually very similar, right? This piece of text changes. Not a great way to toggle between these, but you lose this round versus you won this round. And then you've got this stuff, which is a $sign icon. And this one is the hand holding USD, hand holding $sign. So I think there's a way that you could maybe make this a display results component and pass in a win or lose and show the appropriate message, and then also show the appropriate icon. I think you could get away with doing one component for that. Let's see, I'll skip over game over. One of the things I do see, and this is relatively small, is you could look into doing some automatic formatting, code formatting in VS Code if you're using VS Code or others. Something like Prettier could kind of take care of bringing this column, where does this go, back here. And if you do it to save or to activate on save, to format your code on save, it will format your code on save, and then you don't have to worry about it. So I would suggest looking at taking a stab at setting that up. And I think it will, not that your code is pretty well organized, to be honest, but just those small things that you might forget, it'll kind of take care of that stuff for you. All right, I think we got just the title here. That seems pretty simple. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So the last thing is the main component. And I think this is, there's a couple of different things in here that would be pretty good feedback. I think one is this component is super long. So I would recommend trying to split some of this stuff out. For me personally, when I come to the app.js, like the index page, one of the things I really want to see early on is your actual JSX, what you're actually displaying to the user. So by having to go through all of this code, it's kind of tough to then scroll down to get to that. So there might be some ways to break this out into different components. Another thing that I see is you've got a big state for your app. I think this is where you could get into something like the context API for React with React 16. Relatively new, but it helps manage like bigger pieces of state. This to me seems like a lot of state in your app specifically. And there's a lot of code associated with it, I think, as well. So it might be able to look into, one, breaking this out into separate components, and then also using something like the context API to store several different pieces of state and only accessing them when you need them. So let's look at this roll dice function, get a couple random numbers, you add them together to get the new point, and then you call set state twice back to back. And so one thing you could do is you could do both of these in one fell swoop. So you can add right choice and then say random right choice and then get rid of this one completely. And then also you can, right now what you're doing is you're calling set state and then passing in a callback function. You don't actually need that. You don't need to pass a callback function unless you actually want access to the previous state. So if you're just setting state, you can get rid of this part and get rid of that part. And now that's all you have to do. And you can do as many properties in there of at a time. So you don't have to call set state back to back. And then you can shorten it a little bit by not passing back a callback function. You're just passing in the object that you want to update on the state. So I think you've got several in here. Let's see if I can go down. This set state, this set state, this set state. So you can break those up. You can opposite of break those up. You can combine those together to call set state once and make it a little bit shorter and cleaner. All right, so then you've got, this is the logic to say if the user has previously won or previously lost, or the state for point is set to 0, what this is basically saying is the user starting over in terms of they have to roll a die to set the new point, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. So I think one thing I would recommend is I would have this property maybe not be point, but maybe be something like game state maybe. And with game state, you could do something like -1, 0, and 1. So by default, it would start at 0 like you've got. Then you could have the win be a 1 and a lose be a -1. I know in JavaScript you can basically assign any type of value to a variable. It doesn't matter because it's dynamically typed. I'm not a fan of that personally. It's a little bit of my preference. So if I have something that I'm usually dealing with numbers, I want to stick with numbers. If I get into strings, I want to stick with strings. So for me, I would probably update that to a game state and then use 0, -1, and 1 as the different states. All right, so I'm just looking through here. You've got separate functions for reset, game, win, and lose, and these things are very similar. I think you could have this be reset game and be a true or false for whether or not you won, and this would be did win. And then in here, you could do win-loss to be did win. And I'm not sure what all these other functions do, but I think you could take like one generic function for reset game instead of having two for reset loss and reset win, and then just use a parameter that you pass in there to determine how to handle the rest of it. So more feedback on set state. Put those all together, make them really, really simple. And I guess you do have a generic reset game, but I still think these could be minimized to be something else. So maybe you just call reset game and pass in the Boolean for whether or not you win or lose. These set states, one of the things, okay, so with you've got an if else to then set the state, and basically you're only changing this text. So I could create a variable called result text equals, and then use a ternary operator. So win loss question mark, and it's saying if win loss is positive, then my text should be win, else it'll be lose. All right, and then I don't have to do these conditions, and I could clean up this state a little bit. Don't need the state, or don't need the previous state, and then I could just assign this to my result text. So that's going to look a lot cleaner there. And then obviously you've got more set state here, so I could put that one in there and this one in here. And I could invest in some auto formatting as well. But I think that would, let me get that all right. This is a lot cleaner than what you had. So you can determine if you're looking between if this set state to this, if else set state to something else, that might be a good use for a ternary operator like this, and then just call the set state once. I think you could make some major improvements with that one. Again, more set state here. I think you could maybe call a generic function update bet, and then tell it what to update to, and maybe remove a little bit of duplication there. You've got some checks in the increase bet to check to make sure they actually have the funds to do that, which I think is good. I'm glad you thought of that. And more things here. So same idea with this one. If const, let's say, what are we setting here? Color equals, and then we're checking this dot state dot dice start color. If it equals green, then set the color to navy. If not, which that looks a little confusing. I would think if it was green, it would stay green. Set it to green. Okay. So then we don't need this one, and we don't need this one, and we don't need the previous state. All right, then we can just do that. So same scenario. Use the ternary operator, call set state once, and update this to use the color. Yeah, something like that. And actually, I'm going to save this just to kind of see if this actually still... No, it looks like I changed some other things that I didn't update other references to. Anyway, so I'm kind of hacking around here, but I hope this gives a good idea of some things that you can change. Again, this file is pretty long, so I would recommend putting this out into maybe a couple of different components. I don't know how you do that exactly. But something like restart game, obviously now this could be you're calling set state once if you update things appropriately like this. So you can start to get rid of a lot of these if you put them all in one set state. That would clean up a lot of it. It will clean up your code a lot. All right, so that's what I got. Again, let me actually undo everything I did on this file, which is a lot. All right, save that just to make sure it's running. Cool. So there's the game. JC, I want to say thank you for letting me do my first code review on your code. I think it takes a lot of courage to let people do this and let me put this out as a video, so I really appreciate that. For people out there that are watching as well, highly recommend following JC. He's honestly an inspiration for me. He works really, really hard. He's really great in the community and is very active. If you can tell by the things that he does with 100 Days of Code, which is the kind of people and culture and community that I think I want to help build, and he's obviously kind of dedicated himself to help building as well. So I want to thank you guys for checking out the first code review. This has actually been super fun for me. Hopefully it was useful for you, JC, specifically. Hopefully this is useful for you as well. So anyway, thanks again, guys, and I will see you in whatever the next code review is. If you're interested in being a part of a code review, you can send me a message on Twitter at JamesQQuick, and I'll try to get that in the backlog to take a look at later on. Thanks again, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out learnbuildteach.com to sign up for the newsletter to learn about my latest content. Thanks for watching.